Hello and welcome to the CoderPad live stream. So today we're joined by Jordan Wray. Am I saying that right?
Nope, Jared.
Sorry.
It's okay. I'll go by anything these days.
Okay, good stuff. Well, I apologize. But yeah, we're joined by Jared, who's actually I'll let you introduce yourself because I'm sure I'm going to butcher that too. We're here to talk about interviews and kind of chit chat about some of his experiences and kind of just chat, hang out.
Yeah. So a little bit about me, real quick. I am the CTO and founder of Palmetto. We're a renewable energy platform. That means our main product is we sell solar, which is really great. Do some really cool stuff around that, and we're starting to do more things around the energy sector. It's a messy business. It has old school utilities, and it's ripe for disruption. A little bit of my background and why I'm so interested in talking about interviewing and stuff like that is I've actually had multiple companies before this, done startups. My most recent exit was to CenturyLink. I had built a cloud computing company, grew that up from 0 people to I think 75 when we were acquired. And then I kept on hiring past that and went from 75 to over 350 engineers running in that. So very passionate about how do you hire, why do you hire, and what is all about. I do think there's a lot of crazy things in the tech sector around hiring, a lot of myths, a lot of weird stuff.
Yeah, it's almost like there's these urban legends that surround interviewing. Like my favorites are all the questions, like the manhole question, right? Like these questions that have kind of permeated through our culture into being these weird, why does this matter?
Totally. I remember this one. I was at Microsoft doing an interview, and this guy literally was like, "Hey, I'm going to write a whole bunch of weird characters up on the board, and I want you to tell me what the next line is." And I looked at it for a while, and I was like, "Okay, this is kind of interesting." So I wrote down the next line, what I thought it was going to be, and he's like, "Oh, that's really interesting." I was like, "Well, was it right?" And he goes, "Well, there's no right or wrong answer." It really was like, are you using your left brain or your right brain? I was like, well, why don't you just ask me if I'm more analytical or if I'm more creative?
Right.
You could have just asked me up front.
Yeah, those types of questions, there are these weird psychosemantic mind games that employers try to play. Yeah. By the way, I think it's super cool that you're taking on renewable energy. Definitely something that we need to be doing. Our planet has a ticking time bomb, so we need to.
Today's Earth Day, actually, which is really awesome,
really?
right? Okay. It's a big thing for everybody.
Totally. So yeah, super exciting. That's awesome. So speaking of these psychosemantic questions, what are I know you'd mentioned the one at Microsoft, but are there any other examples of really weird or bad interviews that you've ran into? Anything that has kind of put you off and go, oh, why was that in the process,
Yeah, I think there's 3 main things that I keep on hearing about, which is pretty mind-blowing that it still happens in the tech industry. There's always the whiteboard, right? Why are we talking about a whiteboard? And it's even funnier when they talk about okay, we want to have you not use a computer, even though that's your primary job, which is kind of mind-blowing. It's don't use a computer, use a whiteboard. Right. And then you're not going to use Google, which, to be quite honest, every developer I know uses Google. Every developer.
Everyone.
There's
engineers.
One. Yeah, totally. That's the first one. The second one are the interviews where they actually just ask you what you want to know. They don't actually ask any questions, which is the whole point of the interview is to get to know somebody and be like, hey, is this person going to be successful in the role that we need and for long term, right? In this culture that we're building. So, when you first go in for an interview, it would really be weird if they're like, hey, what do you want to know?
Right. Well, especially if there's no background conversation, right?
Totally.
I think that there is an appropriate time and a place for a candidate to be able to ask, because I always whenever I talk to people who are like, oh man, what should I look for in a job? It's well, keep in mind, an interview isn't just for you. It's for or it's not just for the company. It's for you as well. You can kind of cross interview. But if that's the only question they ask, it's a little weird. It's okay.
Totally.
Weird.
Yeah. And of course, the third one is the coding challenges, the super crazy ones. That's would you actually build your own? There was this one that always kept on getting floated, was building your own indexing system.
Oh no.
And I was like, well, why wouldn't you just use a database
Yeah.
provider like that can do this yourself? Like,
Right.
would an employer actually ask you to build your own indexing service? I mean,
Right.
maybe Facebook at that scale, but realistically, probably not.
Well, and
This really doesn't happen very
and
often.
they usually have dedicated teams for those things, right? Like it's not like you're going to be working in the front end and then the next day be working in indexing, right? Like you're going to be part of a specialized team that works in something like that.
Yeah, no one's going to like ping you up and be like, hey, really love that React work you've been working on. By the way, I need you to go and build a back-end in-memory database system that can scale horizontally and do it all in real time in sub-millisecond return.
Right. And by the way, I know you're not familiar with these programming languages, but we're going to use Go and Rust and a bunch of other things.
Yeah. Hey, you can definitely do JavaScript. So by the way, you need to also do it in Rust.
Right.
Because it's a cool new hip language.
I like Rust, but
no, Rust is amazing. I honestly think Rust is going to be a massive impact in the C++ community.
And I'm so excited that Mozilla has done a really good job at opening it up to be a foundation, right? So I know that Microsoft just joined the Rust Foundation. So like, I'm really excited to see where Rust goes. We actually, on CoderPad's blog, we just released, I just finished writing an article about Rust and like how to do stuff in it. So
that's awesome.
We're definitely sold on it as well.
Yeah, I was just doing a post recently about this on Twitter, and I was like, I've quit doing C# development. Like, I just don't need it anymore. And so I was like, I really want to figure out what the next thing is, and or next thing I want to focus on. And I've been kind of leaning towards either Dart or learning Rust. So
yeah, Dart's another big one.
Yeah.
But honestly, you were talking about whiteboards, right? And we couldn't agree with you more. In fact, internally at CoderPad, like all the employees have like this internal joke of like, we're CoderPad, the anti-whiteboard company.
Oh yeah.
And we're proud to wear that badge. A great example last week, one of the things that I was streaming on the CoderPad Twitch was creating a database that emulated like a Rust or a REST API, right? So like you had an ORM, which totally standard. Most companies end up using an ORM nowadays, right?
Oh yeah.
So we were building an ORM that hooked into a custom database with like pre-seeded database commands, and it was just like, look, just build us an endpoint. Right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
why isn't that more common as an interview question rather than can you solve this algorithm?
Yeah, and that's like actually at Palmetto why we changed around our stuff. Just to give you a background, I remember meeting with a friend of mine who literally was part of Microsoft, wrote pieces of the ASP.NET MVC framework. Like literally like 6 million developers worldwide use his code.
Yeah, wow.
And he was telling me that like, he could not get hired at this major social company that starts with an F. And I was like, what? Really? And he goes, oh yeah. I've never been able to pass the like whiteboard or coding challenge. And I was like,
so absurd.
Dude, there is something wrong.
Right.
He's like, I'm not good in front of a whiteboard. But then again, he's probably like one of the top principal engineers maybe in this country for building like frameworks and things like that.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really funny to watch.
I don't know if you ever heard of it. I can't remember what his name is, but the creator of Homebrew for Mac.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
They were complaining recently. They're like, so wait, you use Homebrew internally through your massive company. I'm not going to name them, but you won't hire me? Like what? Like that's so absurd, right?
Yeah. And so like at Palmetto, like we were like, look, no whiteboard, because if you think about it, like what you're after for an employee is to become that super successful person. So it's like, how do you do technical interviews and technical challenges in a way that basically gets them up and running? I think CoderPad does a really good job with being like, okay, we can give you basically take-home tests, right, in some way or another. But also like on the flip side, even at Palmetto, we're like, hey, here's a take-home, and we actually, our challenge is build a weather app.
Yeah.
But it's like, then you build the next step, right? A cool little weather app. Some people get really into it, right? It's React. It has an API backend, just like you were talking about.
Yep.
And then the next step is you turn in that code, and we actually go to the next step for pairing, where we
Yeah.
do live pairing with 2 senior engineers from Palmetto. And we're like, oh, now we get to know how this person works. And they get to use all the tools. They get to use Google, they get to use, you name it, whatever they're comfortable with. We're there to basically modify that code base that they just created.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you get to know somebody? Well, you work on code with them.
Right. Right. And like I think my favorite interview was actually one that I didn't get. So the start of the interview process was super similar. They had like this super basic, here's a mock backend. So, you know, you don't have to worry too much about like APIs going down and whatnot.
Mhm.
They're like, here's this mock backend. Can you build a quick to-do app? Right. Like something super simple, just boop, done. And I built one. And one of the things that I did is I was using React and I was using Use Reducer. Or maybe I wasn't using Use Reducer, but I had refactored to it eventually. And I had ended up with the problem where you could potentially end up with both a loading and a finished state, which is, you know, never fun. You can't be both at once. And it was really cool because they were like walking me through, okay, have you heard about like state machines, right? Like finite state machines, and how would you refactor your code to be able to reflect something like it was one of those things where like I had learned about finite state machines a long time ago, and I just was like, whoa, there's this new place. Like I had never connected the dots of like, you can do that in React with state management. Whoa, you know? So like, I think the best interviews not only are able to help gauge someone's ability to learn and like apply themselves, but honestly, if you can leave the interview with like new insights and being able to be like, yo, I was mentored really well. That was hype, but you know, that's a cool experience.
Just like you had, it's like that and moment, right? Where you're working on something and you go to the next step and you're like, oh, and I'm talking about a state machine, and this is how we can apply it. Oh, that totally makes sense now. And it's like, how do you work together and do problem solving? You know, I remember an interview that I did way back in the day, and they literally could not tell me like a good way of collaborating on a problem. So they would give a problem and they would be like, okay, tell us how to solve it. And then I realized halfway through, it was them talking about their problems, and they're asking me to solve it before someone gets hired. And I was like, oh man,
you're like, that sucks. Come on, guys.
Yeah.
Like, that's not cool.
But it's cool when you get to collaborate with somebody and it's like, great, we're solving something together.
Yeah. Well, and like the other part of it, like you were talking about, like trying to sway people to build something for you. And then my mom is a nurse, and one of my mom's favorite interview story is about like her going into an office and they're like, hey, can you build this organize this event for us? And then they didn't hire her, but then they still did the event as she scheduled. And it was like, yo, how do you get away with that? Like, that's awful, you know? And
that happens in the tech industry totally all day long. Like they'll be like, well, how would you solve this problem?
But no one talks about it, right? It's like this big secret that like they've managed to pull. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, but I think it's like super short-sighted too, right? Like because in the end, you're basically trying to solve the now problem, not like the evolution. Like the whole point of hiring people is to be like, okay, we're all working as a team. We don't even know what's going to come up next, what the next big problem is. We're hiring people for the next problem, not just the one that we have today.
Totally. And I think that like to that point, there's a lot of conversation about like diversity and hiring and stuff, you know? And I think that this is like one of those prime examples of why diversity is so important within a company. Like coming from different backgrounds, you have those unique experiences to be able to provide insight into what you're doing next, right? Maybe someone that's been doing self-coding for a long time knows how to bootstrap a project really well, right? Or someone who's been doing enterprise for a long time understands scalability, right? So like having those unique perspectives coming in and being able to tweak and impact the future vision of a product is really cool. Like I've seen it in effect before, and it's like, whoa, that's really cool.
Yeah, I saw this really cool discussion around diversity for a streaming company. And this was a company I worked at for a while. And what was really cool about it is they talked about diversity. And for a while, they were like, oh, we used to code one way for a reason. And when they started adding in more diverse candidates for developers, they actually started finding all these bugs in like language barrier and how the UI worked. And they
Right.
were like, oh my gosh, like literally we were very myopic in it. And I
Yeah.
think that's going to be like the big change over time, especially with distributed now. Like everybody's distributed and it's getting proven out that you can do it.
Oh yeah, and it's totally scalable. I remember I got my first job at Hilton, and they were a remote company before the pandemic, and like I was like, "Yo, wait, I get to work like from here, and I'm working with people in Houston," and like it was
Yeah.
so like it was like mind expanding to be able to realize that that was a possibility, and they managed it really well, in their credit. So I think that we're coming to a head with like these remote workplace scenarios where like people are much more familiar that like, yeah, it's totally possible.
Yeah. It also means like the death of whiteboards because
Yes, amen.
how many people are going to be like, I'm going to fly you somewhere to get on a whiteboard so that you can draw something weird. I still am waiting for like the super awesome person who like goes in front of a whiteboard and just like draws a Mickey Mouse figure or something.
Or just
like
no.
that. Or no, right?
Exactly. We got a comment, getting free work solutions from candidates. How can a candidate even have the right information and context to solve these problems? Yeah, so like that's the absurd part, and this is why it's so short-sighted, is that like you end up solving these problems with not enough context and not enough like vision in the because usually if you're hitting an engineering problem, right, it's not isolated. There's a reason you've hit this problem, and it's usually deeper rooted. So even if they do get a solution, it's usually not very comprehensive or forward facing. So, and that's not usually the fault of the candidate,
Yeah, but this happens all the time, and I've actually coached many people. Like, if that's going on in an interview, you should be like, well, why don't you hire me and we'll solve it.
Hey, look, I'm available for part-time consulting if you want to try it out.
I know. But it happens. It happens all the time.
Yep.
Remember, most companies hire for problems or needs, and that's how they get budgets approved.
Right.
Happens quite often.
Yeah. Very unfortunate. So let's see here. So we've talked a little bit about your company where you do the take home, and then the like the two senior engineer pairs. What other steps do you have in your interview process for your company?
Yeah, we've really simplified it down. I mean, we kind of have a technical track and a non-technical track. And this is really for the technology org. But it's starting to really start rolling out across multiple assets or multiple organizations inside our company. I mean, we're 300 plus people right now. So not huge, but also not small. So on the technical track, we only have 4 steps. That's it.
Wow.
Like we have the intro interview, which is really just a quick introduction. And usually it's about 30 to 45 minutes long. So we talk with the candidate, go over their background, kind of get to know them. And then we actually open up about 15 minutes for them to ask any questions about Palmetto.
Yeah.
All right. What's the culture like? What are the next steps usually comes up during that. If everything goes good on the technical side, the next step is we say, hey, we're going to send you this coding challenge. And we're going to tell them why it's really important, right? Like you're going to pair with some senior engineers next. And the other thing that we do, which is, I think, really good for where we are right now in the state of COVID and everything else. Look, there's a lot of pressure going on for a lot of people. So we actually say, look, you tell us when you think you're going to deliver that.
That's cool.
And so some people, they'll knock it out in 2 days and be like super thrilled about it, jazzed. They're like, this is great. Some people are like, look, I got a lot of stuff going on. I'll get it to you in 2 weeks. And we'll wait. We'll be like, that's great. Yeah. So first step is an intro. Then we send the coder challenge. Second one is that pairing, which is really great. Third is what we call the culture interview. Because we really care about like culture inside Palmetto and is that person going to be successful, right? Our system is super integrated. There's a lot of different teams that it takes to like get one thing stood up. So it's really big to have a good culture. So we actually take outside people from the hiring team and actually put them into the culture
That's
interview.
cool. Yeah.
So that's like product owners are usually involved in that, or other ones. And then the final one is the manager interview.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. If everything goes good, we'll put in an offer right then. The only difference between that, the technical and the non-technical, is that instead of the technical aspect, we do what we call a skills assessment, which is really whoever is a subject matter expert would interview them and talk very deliberately about the skills, what they've learned, their work history around that. But that's about it.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Really, really simple.
Well, one of the things that you touched on that I really appreciated was like letting people be able to kind of have their space and their time. I mean, that's one of the biggest reasons we encourage take homes, but like we've heard a lot of from the autistic community that like, you know, being able to have that ability to step back and have that take home and have that space and environment to themselves really helps to be able to focus and not have this anxiety over this, you know, what's a usually high stakes environment, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then on top of that, there's also a ton of parents in our company that are very mindful of like, look, parents just like, you know, parents and other people with other priorities, like we just don't have the same time schedule that like, you know, someone that might be single and young, you know, might have. So it's definitely appreciated that you have those.
And I would probably agree with you on that. Like there is a lot of people who are looking for a job in their current job, and they have to time manage, right?
It's hard.
They're not going to knock it out in one day. The other thing that's really been bugging me lately is like the all-day interviews.
Oh, nightmare.
Everybody does them though.
Yeah. So like,
it's
7 hour long interview. How? What?
Well, one, you have to take a day off, right?
Yeah.
Which is crazy. A lot of people are worried about their jobs in a lot of cases right now, especially where the economy is. And it's like you're asking somebody to take a day off, to do a job interview, do 7 hours. And by the way, they're exhausted by the end. They have no mental power. So I guess if you're testing their mental power, that's probably going to work. But it's kind of crazy that they still do that. You should split it up a little bit. Sometimes we'll double up one of the culture and the pairing, but we try to space it out for a reason.
Totally. So we got a question. This pairing concept of the interview process is new to me. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. This is something that I don't think was really possible up until, the last 3 years. And so we're already distributed at Palmetto, which is crazy in itself. And a lot of our engineers still do pair programming. So we actually used tools like Visual Studio Live sessions so that we can actually basically collaborate on the same code base and share that out. And we also use Zoom, or we also have Slack and Google. Matters which one's working that day. But the big thing is the pairing is all about two developers or multiple developers working together on the same problem. And usually how this works in pair programming, there's some really great books on it, by the way, is one person is actually writing the code. The other one is researching any issues or problems or gotchas. And they're basically collaborating on the problem at the same time. Now, this gets really interesting, right? Because say during a pairing, like for instance, the project that we do the program take home, you basically take it home, you write it, and then we're going to basically evolve it, right? We're going to say, oh man, this weather app you built, really, really cool. Now let's add in session management to save all your settings, or let's add in additional features. We want to show multiple locations. So you're actually going to modify it, and the pair programming is working together on it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been doing, because I've been hosting mock interviews since I started at CoderPad, and one of the really cool experiences while doing a mock interview in CoderPad is, you know, we have the ability to do multiple editors in the same window, right? Exactly what you're talking about, pairing. And it's really cool to be able to be like, hey, like as an interviewer or interviewee, like, hey, I'm kind of stuck on this. I don't really see the picture of what I'm trying to grasp at yet, right? And as the interviewer, I can go, hey, no problem. Here's some here's not the whole full solution, but here's the rough structure of the solution and explaining why each step is there. And I've seen moments where, like, I'm working with a senior engineer and they just, like, as soon as you add maybe 1 or 2 lines, oh man, I have this great idea of how to tackle this,
Yep.
And honestly, some of the coolest experience I've had in a company while doing engineering work is those pair experiences. From my last job, pairing with junior developers always provides, great insight and is always a good way to help tutor, newer engineers in the company. And sometimes it's just a good way to fix a really complicated problem. Sometimes 2 heads better than 1.
Yeah. And it's been proven, right? Like,
oh yeah,
what's really funny about pairing is everybody's like, when you first hear about the concept, you're like, wait a second, you're going to take 2 engineers, their full-time salaries, and you're going to write 1 set of code.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That's like,
how could you?
Are you crazy? Yeah. But it's been proven over and over again. There's this really great guy named Jim Newkirk, who's like one of the founders of Agile, right? He was there when they did the Agile manifesto and everything. Mm-hmm. And he always talks about pair programming in a different sense. He's like, look, you're not basically writing code to write code. Like, developers aren't paid per line anymore. No. They're paid on delivering of a complete solution. And by putting 2 heads on it, you usually catch each other on certain things. And also you're able to research things faster. Right. So the code quality is 10x more. And it's been proven over and over again with pair programming, right, that every single time you pair, you usually have a better solution overall. And less technical debt.
The true 10x developer was teamwork all along.
Yeah. I always think 10x developers.
I always have to make a 10x.
Not even going to go into it.
So one of the things that you had mentioned that I was kind of interested in, like, following up on, you had mentioned that there was a culture section of your interview, and I think that, like, it's so important to have that culture fit, to make sure that you're able to have like an open and safe environment for your employees to be able to, we talk about like diversity, right? But if you don't have that like culture in place to provide a safe environment to explore that diversity and to share your thoughts and opinions, what's the point, right? Like like totally. You're defeating yourself. So I'm curious, as an employer, what do you do, like, once an employee is joined with the company? What is kind of like that onboarding process look like? Like, how do you help encourage that culture mesh and communication?
Yeah, I would say, Palmetto, we started the tech team fully remote, which was really great. So we kind of had to build the distributed nature in that model. So there's 3 things that we really do with every single employee that comes into the tech organization. One is the people and culture team are amazing. They actually schedule all the meetings up front. So we ship their laptop ahead of time. Wow. We ship all their stuff, basically that's all delivered to them. And then come Monday, we actually have 2 training sessions or 2 onboarding weeks every month. And on Monday, they start. And it literally is like going over the company, the culture, why we build it a certain way. There, you actually meet multiple people in your organization, and you'll basically do a day of onboarding. The second day, you actually meet who you are going to be paired with. And what that is that usually it's someone who's either on the team and really knows the culture already, or someone who is in the same type of role. So if it's a product owner that's being onboarded, you would bring on another product owner and you would pair them together, and you would actually be in all the meetings with them. So for the first week to 2 weeks, you're basically having a buddy system to get up and running. One of our goals that we have is that we want you writing code within a week, not committing code, but writing code into the platform. And you're doing that through pairing with your buddy. Which is really great because you're going to have a lot of questions, right? Like, wait a second, what's this repo that says it's called, Solar Flare? Like, what is this?
Right.
And we're like, oh, or Helios is another repo we have. Like, I mean, all sun crazy names, but when you think about it, it's like, you don't know what this is. Like, how does it work? Where is it deployed? How is it going to do things? Like, you're going to have those questions. Right. So we start with that. The other thing that we do at Palmetto, which is really amazing, and I can't believe we were able to pull this off, is we actually still have a daily company stand-up
Okay.
every morning. I mean,
For
we have
300 people.
300 people and we still
Wow.
do it. And it is the most informative thing I've ever seen put together.
How long do those take?
15 minutes.
No
It's
way.
amazing.
There's no
No,
way.
you have 15 minutes. What's really crazy about it is they actually do it per org. So Fridays are always tech. We always do the Friday ones. So usually we're releasing every other Friday. So usually demos on one of the Fridays, or thought of the future. And then on release Fridays, we talk about all the features and what we're releasing. You got 15 minutes.
Wow.
We have our customer care organization that actually covers all Wednesdays, which is awesome. Our policy people usually do every other Thursdays. There's actually a team, Quinn and her team basically manage that entire calendar. And it's really cool because throughout like a 2-week period, you literally see everything that's going on across all the orgs, which is really awesome.
Yeah. Wow.
So it really kind of gets you ingrained on what's going on and how that's working.
Right. Man, I'm thinking about like the stand-ups I've been a part of. Man, I've had teams of 5 that have done longer than 15-minute long stand-ups.
Oh yeah. Did you have to like introduce? Did you ever hear like the bowling ball concept for?
I don't think I have.
Oh man, there was this team that my wife was on back in the day when she was doing development, and she actually, if stand-up took too long, they would actually introduce a bowling ball, and this was all in person. You would have to hold the bowling ball with one hand while you gave your quick stand-up to make it go faster.
See, all I can think of with that picture is my girlfriend's brother, who's like this big bulk bodybuilder.
Oh yeah, he would have no problem. He's like,
yeah.
We'll be here for 2 hours. It was really, really funny.
That's funny. That's a clever way of solving that problem. See, I haven't heard of that one, but I heard of planking. Where like, okay, everyone has to plank for 15 minutes. And like, that's how you get it. I'm like,
there's no way I could do that. We would have like a 2-minute stand up.
Man, forget 2 minutes. I'd be there for 20 seconds.
Yeah. So culture is like a big thing, but I also think like through the interview process, that's like why it's so important for us.
Totally.
You're hiring people that you want on mission with you long term. No matter what company you're at, there's a mission towards that company. So how do you actually do that, which is really big?
Well, and one of the things that you had mentioned is having code written within the first week, which might sound like I think when I had started programming, if I had heard that sentence, I would have been like panic mode, right?
Oh yeah.
But if you're really good about like encouraging, like, look, this doesn't have to be perfect code. You can do it with pair program. Like if you're really gentle about it and like encouraging. I remember when I first joined Hilton. Hilton was my first like Fortune 500 company, right? I'd been startup mode for like 3 years before that. So like, I'm pitching to VCs. I'm desperately trying to get us money. And, like I had been really ingrained in that startup culture. And there was this like little, like, the demon on the shoulder that's like, you're not worthy of Fortune. Like you can't do this engineering work. And I remember my very first day on the job, I was looking through the code base and I must have fixed 50 different bugs. And then I thought about it and went, no, these can't be real bugs. There's no way a new engineer that has never worked, and then I deleted all of it. Turns out they were all bugs. And it's really funny because it was only after like a few weeks of at the company where I was like, oh, I can just commit that? You're okay with that? Oh, like, not commit it in domain, but, like as a branch or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was funny because they were like, wow, how did you find these? I was like, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you just dawn on those things. I really believe like getting people to check in code, especially under the guise of like that initial pair programming is really key, right? Because one, you're learning the system, but also you're learning like how to actually run to production. Right. Which is like a whole big process in every single org, right? Like there's multiple environments that you're deploying to, and usually it's all automated.
There's a reason build pipelines are like $1 billion industry, basically, right? Like they're so unique and custom that like you kind of have to get your head around it, each individual one. But sometimes
we do PRs for everything, right? So you have to do a pull request to basically and it does all this validation during that time.
Yeah, totally. So, what you mentioned this really clean interview process that's sure to wow anyone that goes through it. Did you start off with that interview process? Has that been iterative to get there?
Total iterative process.
Yeah.
Honestly, I got to thank like Darren and Lisa, like my two heads of engineering. They really like honed it. I will tell you, I recruited Darren. I knew Darren before, so I recruited him, and his interview process was like, "Hey, I really think that you would be great for this. Let's go."
Mhm.
And that's about it. But as you start bringing people on, like you start figuring out like, what do you want in this? Like what works, what doesn't work? We evolved it over time. We
Mhm.
we didn't start with a programming challenge. We did like a typical interview where it's like you meet with one person and then you might meet with the manager and they can ask whatever they want.
Right.
And that's so not scalable. The best thing about this process is that it's pretty standardized.
Mhm.
So we can swap in and out people who are already trained really easily, right? We can add other senior engineers, other people in the culture interview that have already been trained for it. It did not start out this easy. It was really like a two-step, and I don't think it was an enjoyable process.
Yeah. Well, I mean, growing pains never are.
Mhm.
What resources did you like? Was there anything that like kind of like, okay, we got to get this out, like stepped up and like advice that you would get were given during that time?
Yeah, honestly, it was. I was always the end interview to start out with when we were starting to build the company
Mhm.
and the tech team. And I always ask at the end, how can we improve this process? And man, when people like wanted to share feedback, it was so good.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just amazing. And like, I never thought about just asking for feedback. And there's this really great book called Radical Candor. Um, and it always talks about feedback. And what's funny is if you ask, if I told you right now, hey, I want you to give me feedback on what we discussed, sometimes you'll give it, but not really. But if you're pointed about it, they'll always give you feedback.
Yeah.
So we actually started saying, hey, on the tech interview, how can we make that easier for you? Were you nervous?
Right.
How can we make you feel more capable to do your job?
Mhm.
And we actually had multiple people respond back uh, when I was interviewing them and be like, hey, it's really cool, but I don't feel like you're actually seeing the breadth of my work. I wish I had more time because you would only
Right.
schedule like 45 minutes and like you can't program anything during that time. So it's really just asking a whole bunch of weird questions of what you've done or architecture questions. And we're
Mhm.
like, man, how do we change that? And so the take home was like a big thing,
Right.
um, which kind of just got ingrained in the culture.
Totally. Um, yeah, I remember when I my first programming job was really, really weird. For context, I was getting paid maybe 15 an hour in California for doing full stack development. And the
Wow.
reason for that is because I had no training. I didn't basically know how to program, and I'd done a lot of like material design work. And it was a really long, weird story how I got the job. Um, but I remember I had walked into the original interview with like full suit and tie, like dressed to the nines. And I
Mhm.
remember my boss was like after the interview, before he had officially hired me, he was like, "Hey, some feedback for you. You're a great candidate. Blah blah blah. Here's what you do to sell yourself better. You sucked at that." Like, he was a little forward, but like, don't wear a full suit. People are gonna think you're weird. You're in California. Programmers wear whatever.
Mhm.
And like, I honestly, when I started interviewing again for the next job, I was like, whoa, his feedback was so helpful. Like I didn't really like internalize it until much later. And then when I did
Mhm.
internalize, I was like, man, thank goodness I had that feedback, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes just a little bit of feedback can go a really long ways in that regard.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so
I
I
know
guess
a lot of
that's
people get
that.
frustrated, right? I think that's a great feedback, right? It's like,
Right.
dress for, the environment that you're going to be in.
Right.
I do think that if especially, very old school established institutions, if they want shirt and tie on interview, they should say that up front for tech
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
because that's not the norm in a lot of
No.
places.
Yeah.
Um, Also, the other thing about it that you just mentioned is like, think about long term. what you want that person to be like. And that feedback actually needs to be part of it.
Right.
No matter what you do, especially during that interview process. Some people are not ready for that feedback, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Some people are. And it's always good to ask.
Yeah, whenever I do an interview, I always end like whether I get the job or not, I'm always like, hey, what could I have done better? Like what were some of the mistakes that I made during the process? And there's been some times where like another one of my favorite interviews didn't get the job, and that's okay. They left me a lot of feedback though, right? And
That's
I'd
awesome.
asked for it. They left a lot of like, at the time I was working 2 jobs and I was doing school. And I remember one of the things they told me like really rung out in my mind was, quote, unbelievable work ethic. And I was like, that was like so touching. And then like immediately under code was not unidirectional, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But it was like that positive still stood out to me of like, oh
Yep.
man, like that they actually, this isn't just like some generic advice that they just weren't listening to. They were engaging with me as a candidate and as a person. And like, that was so like, that made the whole experience really stand out to me, that like they listened to my story and that they were willing to actually engage with me rather than just some number in a data sheet somewhere,
Yeah. Yeah. I also think like there's a lot of really good stuff around, getting past the first filter, right? All
Yeah.
these recruiters are out there. They're all trying to do certain things. I will tell you, like right now, we look specifically if they have GitHub or GitLab, any repos that they've contributed to, we
Mhm.
look at that and we value it, right? Because it's like, oh, we see what type of code they're already writing. That's totally
Mhm.
fine. And that's like something that they've written offline or something they've written in the past. It's okay.
Right.
But it gives a really good insight. I think honestly, like resumes should be redone in a lot of cases. A
Yeah.
lot of engineers, even if you're starting out, well, let's talk about someone who has a lot of experience. Before you go and submit your resume, if you have a lot of experience, you should literally put at the top of your resume, here's what I love to do. What are you passionate? What are
Yeah.
your successes that you've had over the last 2 to 3 companies you've been at?
Mhm.
And list them, right? Like, hey, I changed this code around, refactored it with my team. I love doing it. And we grew. This service could do 500% more transactions because of it, right?
Right.
Those wins people really take as big things. And the other thing is if you have online open source that you've contributed to or examples, do that. If
Yeah.
you don't have experience, you should show like, hey, I have a GitHub repo. I've started contributing. These are the things I really love. Having a personal website. A lot of the tech industry is starting to look at those and pay attention. And it
Right.
actually helps formulate the discussion for that intro interview to move on to that next step.
Right. One of the things that I've also done, because I found out last year that I couldn't have I couldn't have a 2-page resume that listed everything because it started overflowing.
Yeah.
And like that was the moment. First of all, that was a very invigorating moment for me of like, yeah, like
Yeah.
like I was so excited to have that experience. But then I started thinking about it, and it was like, did this company really need to know about how I helped set up computers for a high school? Like, not really, like, is that really relevant? But then like, so current job I have, right? I'm working for Codapad. I'm developer relations, and I've never held a developer relations position before. So, but I've done blogging, I've done YouTube videos, I've done streaming, so like it was before I even had my first company listed, I had my blog listed, right?
Yep.
Because that's more immediately relevant to what that position in particular was talking about. I totally agree. You have to for every single job I apply to, I change my resume at least a little bit to be able to centralize on what might be relevant to that company.
Yeah. And if you don't, like, make sure you do it for like, what are your highlights that you care about?
Totally.
Because it's a huge thing. And remember, an average sourcer is looking through hundreds.
Right.
And it is very hard to distinguish. And when they start seeing links like that, they send them to the hiring manager in most cases. And that hiring manager is going to click the link every single time.
Right. The other thing that I tend to recommend for particularly junior engineers that have done college, because
Mhm.
it's crazy. I have some friends that have done bachelors of science or even masters that are
Oh, yeah.
still having a difficult time finding a job.
Mhm.
And what I ended up telling them is like, look, you've done projects for school. First of all, upload them to GitHub. like
Yep. Yep.
absolutely do that. But second of all, like a great example. Let's say that someone is a computer science major, but they did like tons of psychology classes, right?
Mhm.
Those psychology classes aren't useless, right? You
No,
can
no.
totally list those as like human interaction. I know how to be able to communicate with people and reduce like agitated environment. Like there's always something that you can do to take your real world self and make it seem more applicable to the job, because it's who you are. It represents you as a real person, as that candidate, right?
Yep.
um so yeah, totally agree that there's it's interesting how you like have to like resume SEO hack your resume almost.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. Like, it's how are you going to provide something for companies? And I know there's a lot of people still applying, especially like beginning engineers, right? A lot of people are always saying, "Oh, we're really after senior engineers or principal level engineers
Right.
because they want that experience." Um, it to get in, it's really showing that work initially. Sometimes it's just doing a little fun project that ends up
Yeah.
being cool and hip. I saw a resume recently, and the first thing was like, check out my website. And you clicked on it, and it was just his personal bio website, but I would probably say it was one of the
Coolest
coolest,
ones.
well put together websites I've seen in a really long time.
Yeah, that's awesome. And side projects can go such a long way. Like so my first job, the one that I said I had a really long story about, the
Mhm.
story was I had built a website to help convert like normal colors to the material design color palette.
Oh,
And
okay.
the reason they didn't even I didn't even apply to I didn't even know this company existed. They found that website because they were using material design, and I had
Got
my
it.
name at the bottom of the page, and they reached out to me.
Yep,
Right.
yep.
So like, people like that's a one in a million story, right? Like
It
that's so
happens all
uncommon,
the
but
time,
it does
honestly.
happen, you
Yep.
know? Um, so I think that like those types of like, you never know where your side project is going to end up in front of, you know?
No, no.
Um,
I see side projects all the time. I'm still active in open source.
mhm,
Um, Still committing code, even on stupid little projects that I like. But you think about it, it makes a lot, and people really care.
right. I remember I was applying for a job, and I maintain a library called Node Vibrant.
Okay.
And Node Vibrant is a library that helps you like get the color palette from an image.
Hmm.
And I was like looking through stuff, and I was like, hey, so one of your projects is open source. You're using my software. And like that was such a weird experience, because they were like, wait, really? What? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, you know, and what's funny is that I didn't start that project. Right? I'm sure they've been using it for longer than I've been maintaining it, but I'm maintaining
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I think I only had done maybe a maintainer to that project, right? Like open
Hmm.
source is one of those things where like there are so many people looking for help, and there's so few people actually willing to help, that if you are even just willing to do 2 or 3 commits, list that on your resume, right? That's experience.
There's a lot of people looking for maintainers too.
Totally.
Like,
Yeah.
they're like, look, I can't manage this project anymore. I need more help. There's huge lists on that. As a matter of fact, like if you look at just NPM alone, they have all those donates. A lot
Right.
of it's because they can't work full time right now,
Right.
and they're looking for help. And you could actually just go and contribute just a little bit.
Totally.
Um, it helps quite a bit.
Yeah. Um, so as an interviewer, what do you think some of the most difficult questions you, or like not questions, but like what are some of the difficulties that are being an interviewer that most people might not realize?
Oh man, that's pretty hard. You know, gosh, I've probably interviewed like 700, 800 people. So, uh, here's the hardest things is knowing, well, The biggest thing that I usually have struggle with is when it's really hard to understand what the person is really wanting to do. They're either kind of all over the place or not able to give a direction or be like, hey, I'm really passionate about this, or I want to start working in this direction. It would be really good, like upfront when they're like, hey, I've worked in the financial industry my entire life. I want to work in renewables because I'm done with the financial industry. You're like, oh, great. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the financial industry.
Yeah.
It's good to be upfront. The harder, other questions that I would ask that really, are you thinking like harder questions that I would ask or questions that they would ask?
Either harder questions or just like just difficulties in interviewing other people that just might not be immediately recognizable.
Yeah, I mean, other things that we always see, especially with interviewing people, is if they seem super distracted, it's really hard to be like, hey, are you committed in this interview or not? And sometimes it's just, honestly, I had the best response from somebody recently who was like, hey, my son is literally ripping the curtains down on the other side. I think I need to reschedule because this is like my curtains are getting ripped down, or I need to take a quick break. We took a 10-minute break and they were able to refocus, which was awesome.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Right. So it's okay to be, especially now these days, like they're not expecting you to have like this perfect moment. You always see kids walking through the back and stuff like that these days.
Right.
I think that's one big issue. Another one that I always worry about is when they only want to talk about comp right up front.
Yeah.
And I would probably say this, if you're really worried about comp, you should let the recruiter know what your expectations are. And if they continue on the interview, they'll probably they are going to meet your comp.
Right.
But don't ask every single interviewer, because remember, in that process, when you're talking about comp, like most likely those are employees interviewing you. They have no say over your comp at all.
Right.
And it just gets a weird, awkward situation going.
Yeah. And in fact, so here's the big secret that I'm not supposed to share with people, what I do anyways. If you talk about comp up front, you don't have the power. The employer has the power. If you talk about comp later, they're now much more interested in you and you have more negotiation power for being able to say, hey, look, okay, maybe my comp can't be, or like my base isn't going to be that great, but what about 401k? What about time off? What about, like you have much more leeway when you're later in the interview process to be able to negotiate for those things, which I'm sure I shouldn't be sharing with you.
No, I think that's great. As a matter of fact, I always tell candidates, they always ask me for advice. And I was like, look, you get to the final round, they say they're going to give you an offer. They're going to ask for, what kind of range you're at. Right. Never accept the first one.
Yeah, totally. Exactly.
Never accept the first offer, because if they're willing to give you that much, the worst thing you could do to yourself is not say, hey, is there any way I could get a little bit more options, or I could get a small bump, even if it's, 2%, right? Like you're setting yourself up for the future by negotiating every single time. And I will tell you, like all diverse candidates, you should negotiate and literally ask for at least 10% more. Yes. Especially women. I would probably say women are 15% off that we see. And we actually end up bumping them up. Good. And just saying like, we're going to set you at this because they don't feel like they're qualified, which is kind of interesting. And if a woman is applying for a job in the tech industry, most likely they are overly qualified for that job, where I've noticed other candidates, they're hitting like 75% of the qualifications. And they're like, yes, I'm going to do this job.
I'm perfect for the role.
Yeah. And so, you need to like, think about that. Like never go back and be like, oh, I'll just take it as is. Some people do, which is great. And you're like, hey, it's in the right wheelhouse, but at least you can have a conversation about it.
Yeah. And one of the lessons that I learned when I was asking for a salary from one of my positions was like, I asked what I thought I was worth then. And within 6 months, I had already exceeded what that was worth, right? Like I had already grown so much within that period of time that I'm like, yo, I'm well worth that. Like I'm well worth above that now,
Yeah.
Like I'm now part of, like a great example, within 6 months of one of the companies I work for, I added literally a from scratch UI library. I implemented their CI build pipeline. I like 8 different things. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, I didn't ask for this role. Like, I kind of just took on this position, and I'm not getting paid like representatively of this,
Yep.
like this isn't what I thought the role was.
Yeah, and you bring up a really big point, right? Is it's not only just the role. The other thing that every person interviewing should ask for when you get to that final stage, ask about how the annual review process works.
Right.
What is the review process? Is it standardized? How does it usually work? How did it work last time?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and there's so many companies that just don't have review processes, right? Or rather don't have any way. Like, there's so many companies that I've talked to that like, so what is the potential for promotion? Like, what is the vertical? And it's just like, nope, give up. Like, and like, why? Like, if someone's doing a great job and like they're willing to be able to manage and like work and effectively maintain a larger scale than what they're working on, why would you not? Like, that's value. Why would you not like hook into that value as a company, right?
Yep. And how does the cycle work? At Palmetto, we do performance reviews, and there's actually companies who do performance reviews even if you've only been at the company for a month. How can you like assess performance? Like, that's impossible. So we actually have a golden rule, like nobody within 90 days, like if you basically start in March, or you're not going to get our mid performance review, right? Like, we're just not going to do that. And we'll figure out how to basically set you up for the annual long term. But man, like, you really need to know how that's structured. And also, like, a lot of people have bonus structures, right?
Yeah.
Do they actually get paid out? Do they not? What did they get paid out last time?
Yeah, and one of the other ones is like, how does the equity vest, right? So like I was watching, I'm not going to name the company again, but there was a company that I had heard of that was like, yeah, we vest a certain number of shares, and they were giving like 10% year one, 10% year two, and then for the last 2 years, every 3 months, it was like 20%. Yeah. Like, yo, come on. Like, that's so cheating. You guys, come on. Like,
and just to let you know, like, most startups have standardized their option vesting systems.
Right.
It should be over a 4-year vesting cycle every single month.
Consistent.
It's consistent, right?
Yeah, totally.
And you have to ask, like, that it's a huge gotcha. I remember back in the day, a really big e-commerce player used to literally do all their, like, I think it was like 3-year vesting cycles, but literally it was very similar to what you're talking about, where the first 2 years was like 20%. And then the last year was like 80, because they knew the burnout ratio.
Right.
And they literally were just counting on people to burn themselves out.
Which is like, that's so bad. Ugh, I hate it so much. Like, burnout is already such a big problem. Don't gamble with it. Like, please don't encourage it. Come on.
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. And burnout's a big thing. We have people ask us all the time, how many hours do you work at Palmetto? Yeah. We just announced just recently that as of July, we're only doing 4-day work weeks.
Yes. So I joined the company CoderPad recently, obviously. I was like, just, like, okay, 5-day work week, no problem. And then Amanda, our CEO, she's just like, oh, by the way, starting summer, 4-day weeks.
Yep.
Whoa, like, wait a minute, how does that work? Like, I've never been in a company that's like rewarded like work that way, which was really cool. I'm excited for it. So
yeah. And is it 4-day work weeks and you're just basically compounding everything on 4 days instead of that? The other thing is, especially for startups, if you're joining a startup, you need to ask, like, what does it look like? Yeah. I will tell you, I work a lot. I enjoy, I'm super passionate for my stuff, but at the same time, I understand when you're in a group environment, like, you have to have a constant pulse. Like, you can't go past that. And interviewers should ask, like, what is the expectation, right? The expectation at Palmetto is that you do not burn yourself out, right? Because we want constant releases and constant performance, because that's what we're counting on. And so you have to really think about that and ask that during the interview process.
Yeah, and understanding, like, Great example. I have like weekly therapy, right?
Mhm.
And that was one of the things going in is like, hey, you guys just have to be okay with this, right?
Yep.
Like I need it for my own like mental well being and like to be able to be cognizant and to prevent that burnout. And CoderPad has been fantastic with that, with like supporting that. And I think that those types of things are important to bring up during the interview, right? Because again, as a candidate, you're checking whether that workplace, whether that experience is going to work well for you as well. So totally agree.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I know we have an hour, but if you have a little bit of extra time, maybe the last question. What we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but what can candidates do to like help stand out? Like even like let's say they get through the first stage, what can they do to really help themselves through that process?
So I think, especially in ours, the candidates that have really stood out have been excited about the company, have done their own research,
Mhm.
which is always nice. They usually have prepared questions that they care about, which is really big, and being very prepared about like, hey, I'm going to ask these questions. I really want to know what that looks like across the board. Um, I do think those two things are really critical. The last one is really understanding what you want in life.
Yeah,
Because these jobs, like, yes, everybody wants a job. Everybody wants, the next good gig. But realistically, if you're thinking about what you want, you need to make sure that like that job is going to align to where you're going to go and what
right.
you want to do. Because it's going to really suck if like you go and basically take a job and you're like, hey, I don't really like this, or it's not paying the right amount of money, because it just sets us up all off on the wrong foot
Right.
right away. So it's good to ask those questions and really understand that and know what you want out of it, right? Some people
Yeah.
are like, look, I just want to interview at a company and I want a paying job. Great. That's your focus. You should go after that.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that, like
No, none.
sometimes like people got to eat, right? And
Oh,
like
yeah.
there's nothing wrong with just that being the thing. And I mean some of the best engineers I know have even been in that situation, right?
Mhm.
I think like right now in particular, I've seen a lot of threads that are like, if you're not passionate about programming, why are you? It's like, no, shut up.
Yeah,
Like,
I think the opposite of that. Programming is a tool belt or it is a tool belt to use to create something, just
totally.
like a journeyman would use, their own tools to do something.
Yeah,
That's what programming does. You do not have to be passionate about programming. I've gone 6, 8 months not programming at all. And then something will come up and I'm literally coding every single day,
yeah,
right? Like you should not care. It is not about that. Like it is okay to be like, hey, this is a 40-hour week work thing for me, and I can output at the same thing and I can get paid really good for it.
totally. So, Jared, thank you so much for being here.
Hey,
It's been a fantastic conversation. It's been awesome having you here.
yeah, great being on. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, gang, I think that's going to be the end of our stream. Oh, actually, hang on. As technical interview in the AM in the morning, this advice has been Sir. Thanks, fellas. Awesome.
That's
Well,
awesome.
I hope everyone's enjoyed the stream. We'll be uploading this to YouTube and saving it as a Twitch VOD. And until then, see y'all next time. Take
Cool.
care.
Thanks.